Чи добре чуєте мене? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Не може такого бути. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Має приходити. Перевірте там, може перепідключити інший канальчик.
Приходить звук? Так,
Нам дадуть мікрофон. Щось треба натискати? Так. Вітаю, колеги.
Good day, dear colleagues. I guess we can start. Thank you, first of all, that all of you have joined us today at this conversation. I wouldn't even say the presentation, but the conversation about the detention centers at the occupied areas and how we'll be talking how these detention centers are included into the system of Russian Federation and are the components of the prosecution of the Ukrainian citizens under the occupation on the territory of Russian Federation. My name is Tatiana Katrochenko. I am the head of the Media Initiative for Human Rights. I really thank our speakers today, and I hope another speaker will join us later. We have Lydia Podezerska. Lydia is the resident of Kherson City who was under occupation in 2022. In July, it started in the end of July, if I'm not mistaken. You were detained by the representatives of Russian Federation and were kept in several detention centers in Kherson region for some time. And the head of the board of the Crimean Human Rights Group, Olga Skripnik, and I hope will be joined in Zoom today online, the head of the Department of Countering Crimes under the Conditions of Armed Conflict of Kherson Regional Prosecutor's Office, Oleksiy Butenko. So I will be the moderator today, but also I will try to provide you several introduction remarks, because I'm also one of the authors of this research. So, first of all, why did we take this topic? Media Initiative for Human Rights is researching the detention centers at the occupied areas even before the full-scale invasion. We were monitoring the detention centers at the occupied territories of Donetsk and Luhansk regions. We also saw what was taking place in Crimea lately. Not that much lately, but still, after the beginning of the full-scale invasion, we understood how the occupation would take place and what Russian Federation, how Russian Federation will act at the occupied areas. So, it is obvious that at the occupied territories, the prosecution started against the civilians during, first of all, because they countered occupation, because they disagreed with occupation, and we all remember all of those numerous meetings and strikes in Kherson, Kakhovka, Nova Kakhovka, Melitopol, Berdyansk, and when all of those protests took place, it was obvious that Russian Federation at some point will start to counter them. They will start to detain the citizens of Ukraine, as it used to take place in Crimea, in Donetsk or in Luhansk. They detained such a number of citizens that the usual detention centers, which used to be on the territory, the occupied territory, were not enough, were not sufficient. So, in the beginning of 2023, we heard that the civilians are being detained in Chongar. It was a very vague notion what Chongar is, where exactly. Chongar didn't have any detention centers for civilians. Speaking about Kherson, they have a special detention center, but where will the civilians be taken to in Chongar? Finally, we understood that Chongar was organized as a kind of a spontaneous detention center in the premises which used to be not made for the detention, for the accommodation of the civilians, of any people. This was the building of the former border station. This is the premises which existed before, and later it was taken by the border station, the border unit, which was close to the Crimea, occupied Crimea, after 2014. And at the moment we understood that it really looks like Donetsk Izolyatsiya, when at the territory of the factory of insulation materials, the factory which did not have any conditions for detention, there was a kind of a secret jail. But the difference between Chongar and Izolyatsiya was that Chongar, the detention center of Chongar, the so-called one, was introduced into the system, the federal system of penitentiary system of Russian Federation. It was quickly introduced, and it was shown in many documents, the documents which we also can use, and we have them. This was the main difference. But altogether, we understand that Chongar still has become a place which has connected the occupied Crimea with already occupied part of Kherson and Zaporizhia regions. This is the context. And I would like first to pose the question to Lydia, so that Lydia could tell us, if I may, why she was detained, and the bigger part of her family, her friends, were detained as well. And under which circumstances you found out yourself to be in Chongar? Because we understand that you were one of the first, and your relatives were one of the first in December 2022, when the so-called detention center has started the functioning. And under which circumstances you found out to be there? How can you describe these detention centers? Thank you. Good day. First and foremost, I do apologize in front of the audience. I will be speaking Russian because it is hard for me to interpret in my mind, and I'm really excited, overexcited now. And my Ukrainian is not at the best level because I studied in the Soviet Union in Murmansk region in Russia. I understand everything, but I cannot talk that much in Ukrainian, and I'm really ashamed of that. So my family, my husband, my husband's brother, my stepson, and the father-in-law were taken on the 21st of July in Kherson city by the representatives of FSB. We were detained in my apartment where my father used to live when he was alive. During the war, my stepson Serhiy was the deputy head of the pension fund in Kherson region. Unfortunately, the management of Kherson pension fund was quickly leaving the city, so Serhiy was left on his own. But as he is patriotic, he decided to help the pensioners till the end. He helped the pensioners, and he saved and hid the databases of the pension fund. As he is an IT guy, he graduated from the National Aviation University in security faculty, so he hid the databases of the pension fund and the computers, the laptops of the pension fund, which he brought to this apartment, which used to belong to my father, because he was afraid that at his permanent place of residence, the FSB specialists would come there and also coerce him for cooperation. He was definitely against that. It was horrible. It was very uncertain in Kherson city. We did not know what was taking place. We were looking for 3 days how those attacks were taking place against the bridge. Honestly speaking, we did not believe our own eyes. We could not understand what was going on. Serhiy was living in this apartment. He brought the equipment of the pension fund there, and one day he just disappeared. He was out of touch. My husband was going to search for the son, and everything was there. The money were on the table, the computers were there, but he vanished. He was sought for along the whole city, but he vanished. We didn't even know that some police was in the city, because the city was mostly patrolled by the soldiers. They were going along the streets, shot with the tanks. So my husband, he is a kind of a clever person, so he decided that if Serhiy disappeared, he would likely to be detained, so he needed to rehide these computers. The whole family of mine decided to do that. Our friends helped us. I brought the boxes from my work. We packed the computers. The husband with my daughter-in-law were going to the administration to search for Serhiy, and then he called our bus from the job, which we loaded. We loaded the boxes, but 5 computers did not find the space in the lorry. So this vehicle went to my husband's brother's apartment, to the neighboring street, and I stayed in the apartment. I had a feeling that we were just given away by our neighbors, because when I went outside, there was no one outside when we were loading. But then the neighbor came out and said, "Lydia, what did you take away?" I said, "I want to rent an apartment," so I took some of our belongings. So The guys took their own vehicle, came up to us, we went to the entrance, and then we were instantly taken by the guys with machine guns. We were pushed to the apartment. They put us in different rooms, to the balcony, to the kitchen, and when it turned out that Serhiy was taken in the toilet, he was kept in the toilet, he was brought there. So they began to interrogate us. The guys, the men were beaten. Not that much, but still they were beaten. I was never beaten. So we were trying to find the way out, but we failed. Serhiy said, I'm just renting an apartment. I said that I just decided to give this apartment away. I have the products in the fridge. I wanted to take them. They looked at my passport, and we had different surnames with my husband. But we had the stamp. So we wouldn't even resist. We were taken to police. Serhiy was severely bitten. I saw that. I still can see the traces of his blood on the wall, as well as his saliva on the wall. So Serhiy was taken into the vehicle. We had 3 cars, and the keys were taken from us. I was taken to some Zhiguli car, and I heard somebody moaning. It was Serhiy. He said, I'm in pain. I said, let me give you something through the back seat. I didn't know that I couldn't give him a pill. He said, my hands are tied. So he used to be in the handcuffs behind his bag, so he was just lying in the luggage boot. So in the trunk, we did not get any accusations. We were not getting any charges. We were interrogated only in a week. They violated everything during the interrogation. They forced us to sign the protocol, and they kept us there for 3 months. My daughter-in-law found a lawyer from Crimea. He was ready to come, and he was ready to come for $1,000, but they said that the lawyer wouldn't be allowed to get to us. Nobody was allowed to join us. The communication was limited. So we were staying there for 3 months. When Kherson was deliberated, we were taken away to the left bank. We used to be first in Oleshki detention center. So, this was the first time when I saw the real barrack and the real casemate, the solitary confinement cell. I was lucky because I was in the solitary cell, but it was still very hard. There was no light, in fact. The glass in the window was broken. It was cold. The bed was iron. We didn't have water. Some litter and garbage was on the table and under the table. The toilet was awful. The volunteers fed us once a day. They gave us something to eat, just almost nothing. In a couple of days, we were just like cattle, taken. The soldiers came and tied the hands, so we were taken into the bus. They did not let us to raise the hand. They promised to shoot us as expendables. We didn't even know where we'll be taken to, but we were taken to Kalanchak. The guys were staying there, but I was taken to the bus again. One of the soldiers offered me to the rest of the staff. I was told that they would like to rape me, but no, they didn't want me because I was in the awful state, and I was of their mother's age. But they were not sorry about my age. Still, they did not touch me. They were disgusted by me. I was taken to Chaplinka. First, I didn't know where at, but then it turned out to be Chaplinka. I was searched. They took everything from me. They said that the dogs stole my things. What did the dogs steal? Shampoo or my blood pressure meter, and they brought me to the cell with another man. The man turned out to be decent. However, he was a collaborationist, but he was decent as a man. So we were staying at the same cell for 2 days. He was in the bed above, I was below. Then the girls were taken to the same cell, he was taken to the basement. So for about a couple of months, we were staying in the cell with 5 ladies. Then the girls were more numerous, so we were taken to the basement. I do apologize. But the hardest was when you don't know at all what is happening, and the girls in the same cell had really limited communication. They did not let us to write notes. My daughter-in-law finally found a person who would bring me anything, at least something, because we were fed, well, we were not fed, in fact. So it was really hard when you don't know what's happening with your relatives. I didn't know where my children were. I didn't know where my dog was. The funniest thing was that my children are grown-ups, at least. But I was really worried about my dog. My dog maybe even kept me alive because I needed to come back to the dog. The dog kept me surviving because I promised the dog that I'd come back. I promised him the long and happy dog's life. I had to stick to my promise, whatever it may seem ridiculous. So I tried to keep for the last straw. As they say, I tried to keep to the air with my teeth. Lots of things happened in Chaplinka. Many bad things took place there. Then my daughter-in-law told me, well, at least gave me a piece of news. They coped with that. They put some food into the notes. But they, of course, stole some of the products. Some cabbage salad would never be taken by them, so she put a note to my salad, and I could find it, but we could be punished for the notes. So she wrote to me that they gave us half a year in jail. Half a year passed, I was sitting and waiting, I was hoping, but nothing happened. Then I asked the head of this unit. Half a year passed, and he promised to get to know, and he said that my term was prolonged for 2 months. I was crying for a day, but somehow I did not cry during any other day. I don't know why. Maybe I couldn't show that I'm weak, that it is hard for me. Well, what else? We had to live on. In 2 months, we got together. They forced us to write the statement that all of the things were brought back to us, that we don't have any claims, and they took us somewhere. We were told either to Genichesk or to Chongar. So we stayed during the night in the detention center of Novotoroitske. I met ladies from Kherson there as well. We exchanged contacts with them. They wrote that down, and they told that our mayor, Igor Kolykhaev, was there as well. He was in Chaplinka when I was there. He was brought there, and I saw him personally. I would like to say for everyone, whatever he is accused of, any collaborationism is totally wrong. This man is really ours. He helped us and other convicts, and he was holding on. He never bent his head in front of them. Then he was brought to Novotoroitske, and then my relatives saw him in Chongar. They were sitting in the same cell. So that's what I'd like to say, that Igor Kolykhaev as a mayor was also there and was suffered. He's not a traitor, as many people say. When another girl was brought from Novotoroitske, she was brought to Chongar. And of course it used to be every moving. I was really afraid of that. It was stressful because it became worse and worse and worse. when we were brought to Chongar and just taken to some cell. There was some construction site there. We were taken to the cell, which was just painted, I would say. So each of us, one by one, were stripped naked in front of the cameras. We didn't even know that there were cameras. We were just stripped naked. Well, it was done by the lady still, by a woman. So we were shown to the cameras. They took our things, only let me to have my T-shirt and also the hose, the tights, and it was really awful in Chongar. However, we had the clean bed linen and we were fed 3 times a day. But during the first month, I just wanted either to die or to go crazy, to go mad, because it was still unbearable. We were punished for any action. We were punished because we couldn't even bend over the wall. We couldn't lie down. We couldn't put the legs onto the bed. We couldn't laugh. We couldn't hang the linen where it shouldn't be there. We were just followed and monitored. We said that we need to clean the floor, and in 10 minutes they brought us the bucket. Here's the bucket, clean the floor. First, we didn't have a shower for about 2 weeks. We couldn't even wash. And again, full uncertainty. What will happen with you after that? Not a single person, because we were never given any charges. Not a single one of us. Not a single one. And again, I began to calculate those 2 months. As Count Monte Cristo, I had the notebook, so I crossed out every day. Every single day. In the morning was crossed out, the previous day was crossed out by me, and then suddenly they summoned me, our investigators, who used to be in Dnipro, Victoria, who said they would like to let you go if you sign if you sign the undertaking not to leave. And then I saw the indictment that we were getting to the pension fund and stole the computers, and I was never there. Why didn't you tell us that you were never there? Because I was never asked. Because the first interrogation was looking like this. Lydia Dmitrievna, how come that you are here? And that's it. And then I understood that we would never be let free. So I stopped crossing out the days. Then the daughter-in-law found a lawyer. Then they prolonged our term for 5 months again. And it was really hard when the military police came to us. We called them the Green. When ours hit, they took men one by one and began to beat them when they were hit. That was horrible. We were taken out only once. I was beaten against my legs, but that's it. I don't devaluate my worries. When I say I was not beaten, well, yes, they beat me against my legs, but in comparison how others were beaten, I was not beaten at all. After those beatings, some people were just taken to the cells because they couldn't walk. We were standing with the girls, listening to the shouts and shrieks. We were staying and praying. And of course we had blood pressure after that. We were afraid that we will be taken to the hall. So they tortured. One of the persons on duty was a good cop. Then there was a bad cop and a demon cop. That's how we called them. The demon cop was ours, Ukrainians, collaborationists. They are even worse than the Russians. They were such torturers that I didn't want to live. But then, as I say, we needed to live through the day after day. After you lived through one day, you need to live through another. Honestly, I never believed that we would be freed, that we would be released. But thanks God, our friends found a lawyer. We got lots of assistance from other people from both sides. We had friends. We got lots of help. I hid some money. Maybe I felt something, so I hid some money. I buried the money at my landlord. And then I wrote a note for my daughter-in-law, who took them, and it helped us to pay for the lawyer. So gradually we paid a ransom, because when we were released under domestic arrest in a year, 3 of us, 2 hostages from each family were still there in the detention center, but I was taken under domestic arrest. And as they say, after the lawyer stood for us, I was under house arrest. And the prosecutor told that in the court of the higher stage, we would be convicted in Genichisk for 15 years. But as the prosecutor, the lawyer even said, I will reach the Moscow level. I will fight for you. Otherwise, I will just be retired. The lawyer was pro-Russian, but he was from Kherson. And somehow he was for us. He was helping us a lot. So eventually he came to us and he told us that the prosecutor said that in the higher levels court you will be released, but only in half of the year, $25,000. And the lawyer agreed to pay. The lawyer agreed when we were told about such money, but we were taken everything. The vehicles, the cars, the money were taken from us. So this is how I got the legacy after my father. My father is the citizen of Russia, a professor. So this legacy, this money helped us to pay the ransom. Then we went to Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Lydia. So I had the question that you were in the cell with the women. Were there political prisoners in Chongar, the ones who were detained for their views, and where were they from? Yes, there were some. 2 ladies, one from Melitopol. She helped to bring the explosives. She was helping to take the explosives. Another girl was from Skadovsk. But they were trying to blow up Buluk, so she, with her husband, was trying to do that. So she was taken there. But there were only 5 of us, 5 ladies and 180 men. Thank you. So it turns out that in the middle of 2023, in this so-called detention center of Chongar, there were more than 200 men under detention, mostly men. Why did I ask Lydia who was there? Because my next question was to Olga. I would like to get to know what was the role of Chongar in this connection between the occupied and deoccupied areas of Kherson and Zaporizhia regions. The Kyiv Human Rights Group wrote that there can be Crimea citizens, in particular those who were accused by Russia in the participation in the Crimean Tatar battalion, which is now the 48th separate battalion of the armed forces of Ukraine. So, Olga, the floor goes to you. Tell us about this connection. Thank you. Good day, everyone. Thank you. Tatiana. Thank you, Miklos, for the invitation. And thank you, Lydia, that you shared this information with us and what you and your relatives did, and that you are people of principles and you're faithful. This is how Ukraine is holding on, thanks to such people of you. And we thank the armed forces of Ukraine that we can go on with our work and be here. I really recommend you to delve deeper into the report which we are discussing, which the Media Initiative for Human Rights prepared. Lots of important details are documented there, and I sincerely believe that that's what we need to do as human rights activists, to make the justice closer and to release everyone who is still in the torture chambers. Because, as Lydia described, those are torture chambers. Those are not so-called investigative actions, as Russian Federation claims. Crimea, since the very beginning, used to be and had a very serious role, so that they wanted to start the full-scale invasion. And it's obvious for all of us that Crimea was one of the key bases for the full-scale attack, and it still is. But also Crimea was one of the key ones to go on developing the system of prosecution at the newly occupied areas. And Chongar was one of the evidence that Russia was using Crimea and was planning since the beginning of the taking of the new territories after they occupied Crimea. We also heard about Chongar in 2023, and I also shared it with my colleagues with the Media Initiative that such information is coming. We did not understand what was that, but the relatives and the witnesses said that the people were taken there, about those who were, as we consider, incommunicado. Those people were not that easy to be found in the mentions of the sham court trials or some court materials, but at the moment Russia has already expanded the system of illegal detention centers in Crimea. I'm speaking about the detention center number 2, which was opened later, and also number 8 in Simferopol. To compare, those are 2 new detention centers which are appearing in 2022, but before 2022 they used to have only 1. So you can see how the scale changed, when only in Simferopol there were new detention centers opened. But it was not enough. What we heard, that first Simferopol was really active in 2022. Russia brought everyone who was detained in Kherson region, our civilians, to Simferopol. That's why they opened detention center number 2. And mostly the first cases which we're definitely documenting, the so-called official ones, when the open criminal case was done by FSB in Simferopol against the residents from Kherson and Zaporizhia, was approximately in December 2022, though in fact the people were detained in March, in April 2022, and for the long time they were just kept without any allegations, as Lydia said. The first cases were documented in detention center number 2 in December 2022, when there were some criminal allegations and the so-called investigative actions. And in 2023, there was some information about Chongar appearing, and then it was confirmed and verified, and in the report my colleagues have documented in details how all of that was developed, how Chongar was taken, how the whole detention center was developed in Chongar, which Tatiana mentioned as the border unit, and how it used to be transformed into the detention center. What we were documenting, that the people from Kherson were staying there, and the offensive of Ukraine and liberation of Kherson influenced that the Russians were not releasing our people, but were taking them to other occupied areas or to the territory of Russian Federation. Chongar was first about the people from Kherson. The relatives came to us who were searching for lawyers who would be ready to go there. They came to us searching for different people in Crimea who would be ready to visit Chongar. There were such attempts from Crimea, even of some of the lawyers who really wanted to help, to the relatives at least to find people and to get to the detention center in Chongar. But there were instantly calls with threats that if the lawyers go there and provide some assistance, then at least they won't be able to go on with their lawyer's practice, or they can stay at the detention center as well. And it really made the search of information more complicated, as well as the support of the relatives who were searching for the family members who were detained there. At least we could document 15 cases of the people who lived through Chongar, among them 3 women, 3 Ukrainian women who were political prisoners, political detainees, 6 Crimean Tatars. Mostly they were accused of the participation in the Crimean Tatar battalion named after Chelimjahan. It was not the acting battalion of the armed forces of Ukraine then. It was since 2015. Those are the sham cases in Crimea, lots of them, where the Crimean Tatars were accused of participation in this battalion. And then this practice was just covering the newly occupied areas of Zaporizhia and Kherson regions, so that first they could prosecute the activists of the Crimean Tatar people, and this practice is totally Crimean. This Crimean practice moved to the newly occupied territories. Then the detainment started. So some of those people found out to be in Chongar by these allegations. Then we saw that the people who lived through Chongar, some of them were taken to Simferopol. It was really active in 2023 when, after them being kept in Chongar, they were brought to the detention center in Simferopol, where they created the criminal case after the person lived through the tortures, and as Lydia described, continuous tortures. It was not just one-time thing when people were beaten. People were taken there for months, and they forced the people to sign the documents which later were used in the fake accusations and allegations. The people who stayed in the detention center number 2 in Simferopol after Chongar, as well as other, were all tortured. We don't have a single case, including women, men, as well as men of different age. Some of them were wounded or with some of the sicknesses. All of them were tortured. There was not a single person who was not tortured. All of them were tortured. Moreover, some of the witnesses, some of the people affected, informed that at some of the stages in Chongar and in other detention centers in Kherson region, they could even recognize by voice the representatives of the Crimea FSB who came to them and then interrogated them in the detention center of Simferopol, which again confirms the direct connection of this transfer of Crimean experience to the newly occupied territories. And then the criminal case in Simferopol, obviously, there's always verdicts. There could never be excuses, and it was really typical. If there were about Crimean Tatar, it was battalion named after Chelimjahan, or the so-called allegation of the participation in Hizbut Tahrir, and if it's about Ukrainian women, mostly that they were spies or they had weapons hidden. So those criminal cases were really typical. The same text, which was about the same allegations, which also witnesses about this massive fabrication of the criminal cases, which were taken, the Crimea experience of the criminal cases, fake criminal cases, against the ones who were disagreeing with such regimen in the Crimean. And after the so-called investigation, the people were taken to Russia, mostly to Rostov city, because of these provisions, the military court of Russian Federation should take place. So they were taken to Russian Federation, to the colony, where the majority of them are still there for the illegal punishment, without any opportunity for legal solutions. The only thing that people can hope for are so-called exchanges, because there can't be any other decisions. And even the cases of ransoms are not that frequent. In fact, it's also the exclusion, exception, because if the person is in the system, it is hard to leave. I'm happy that you are freed at least like this with the ransom, because it's not that often. And people in fact, are not that much taken from Crimea, because Russia has already developed its own system. That is the detention center of Chongar, which is an official part of the system, and also they have the system of the so-called occupational courts, both at Kherson region and Zaporizhia region. And now Russia, in fact, doesn't have this need to get everything through Crimea. They've already upscaled this experience. According to the same example, they found that the work of so-called sham courts providing the same judgments and rulings. So not that many people are now taken to Simferopol from the south of Ukraine, from the occupied parts. But still such cases take place. Among those who we registered at Chongar, documented at Chongar, the people who were detained in 2024, but mostly those were the people who were detained in 2022 or 23. So as of today, such cases are not that numerous in Chongar, directly connected with Crimea. The biggest number took place in 2023 and 24. I would also like to add, according to the words of my husband, who was in the neighboring cell, there were not that many women. Our communication was restricted, but the men were moved a lot. So he told, when the men were taken to the court and the person said that he was coerced or forced, the court was just stopped. They brought to the forest. They punished him in the forest, in the woods. Then the person came back to the court and signed whatever they claimed for. Yes, now we're saying about one detention center, but all of the communications which took place then, it's obvious that those detention centers were embedded into this unified system of prosecution of civilians. The crime of prosecution is the part of the crime against humanity. So we can say that we created this report to drive your attention to this detention center and altogether to each of such detention centers, which is the part of the created system by Russia. Today, Lydia mentioned that all of those, in fact, supervisors and the so-called management of this so-called detention center are also citizens of Ukraine. But it's obvious that we understand that Chongar is not just supervisors or monitors who are the citizens of Ukraine, but also the Crimean FSB. And FSB has citizens of Russian Federation working there. And when we speak about so-called sham courts, when the people were taken from the detention center from Chongar to Novotroitsk, occupied areas, then to the occupied area of Crimea, and then to Rostov region of Russia, then we understand that the judges were also appointed at the occupied areas were citizens of Ukraine, and we have the decrees about the appointments of such judges, citizens of Russian Federation, and citizens of Ukraine getting to the territory of Russian Federation were also getting to the system of prosecution. Those are the citizens of Ukraine who were taken to the detention center of Chongar, then brought to the territory of Russian Federation, convicted in Rostov Military District Court, and now they are staying in jails on the territory of Russian Federation, deep inside its territory. So because of that, I hope we can get in touch with Kherson Prosecutor's Office. The question is, Alexei, do you hear us, right? Thank you. That Kherson Regional Prosecutor's Office is reviewing the criminal cases and the detention centers in Kherson region, in particular in Chongar. Could you please tell what you found out? How many notices of suspicion were given? We know that the whole management of Chongar detention center. So please, the floor goes to you. So, dear esteemed representatives of the and your media initiative for the human rights, guests, participants of this presentation. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to Lydia that she shared the circumstances of the criminal actions against her. And also I'd like to thank the organization and you directly that you are helping the law enforcement authorities to document war crimes, that you are dealing with this issue, helping to take to liability the criminals, and that you help restore justice. I'd like to mention that since the beginning of the armed conflict, the actions of the military of Russian Federation and occupational authorities on the territory of Kherson region are really seeing really severe crimes. Those are killings, murders, kidnapping, burglaries, sexual violence, deportation, forced movement, shelling of civilian objects. The terror of peaceful population is going on a daily basis. As of today, the law enforcement authorities of the region started the investigation of 40,000 crimes for the violation of the laws and customs of war. The substantial part of these crimes are the perpetrations about the illegal detainment, imprisonment, and torture of civilians. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion of the aggressor country, the law enforcement authorities see lots of forceful and disappearance of the human rights activists, journalists, civilians at the temporarily occupied settlements. Let me share the statistical data. Sad statistical data. Since the beginning of the military aggression, the law enforcement authorities registered the facts of the kidnapping and disappearance of 1,992 people, among whom the mayors and the heads of the villages and settlements, MPs of different levels, of different councils, starostas of the villages, law enforcement authorities, priests, and just residents of Ukrainian cities, temporarily occupied towns. At the moment of the detainment, as of now, the investigation knows about the release of 1,017 citizens. The occupiers go on illegally detaining 923 persons. By our information, 29 persons who were kidnapped by Russians died because of torture or because of lack of medical care, which in the majority of cases was not provided. 3 people died after being released. By these facts, the investigative units of the law enforcement authorities investigate 1,186 criminal cases, including 28 about the illegal imprisonment of children. The operative and investigative actions confirmed the existence on the territory of Kherson region of 13 torture chambers, which were equipped by the occupational authorities. Besides that, at the temporarily occupied areas of Kherson region, they identified 9 detention centers where the detainees were tortured. And according to the outcomes of the investigations, the prosecutor's office, together with the law enforcement authorities of the region, by the facts of illegal imprisonment and tortures of the civilians, we already gave the notice of suspicion for the 143 persons. We sent 71 indictment to the court about 139 persons, and the courts took 12 verdicts against 14 persons. That is about this category of crimes which we document. Among the ones taken to liability, we see the heads and their subordinates among the occupational authorities, law enforcement occupational authorities, law enforcement authorities of the aggressor country, the National Guard, the Federal Security Service, police, the penitentiary service, the military from the armed forces of Russia, the representatives of illegal armed formations which were acting in Kherson region. One of the above-mentioned detention centers at the territory of Kherson region is the detention center, so-called one, equipped by the representatives of the armed forces of Russia in Chongar village of Genichesk district. According to the information It has been created and started its activity in the beginning of 2023. The representatives of the aggressor country equipped this detention center to keep there the civilians. The tortures took place there, and also the people who were punished, the citizens of Ukraine, were staying there, who were detained and against whom there were court cases for the fake cases. Let me not repeat the same, because all of that was mentioned today already. Undoubtedly, for the above-mentioned facts, we opened the investigation, which is still ongoing. Now, unfortunately, taking into account that the pretrial investigation is ongoing, I cannot provide you with more detailed information during this communication. Because, according to our opinion, the dissemination of such information as of now can harm the security of the people affected and victims who are still now detained, and it can be harmful for the investigation. However, I'd like to say that the information which was mentioned today and the one which was collected during the analytical report which is presented today will be taken into account for sure during the investigation. I really thank for this information, and I have hopes and expectations that later we'll be able to get to you to get more detailed information by the questions which we could pose. This information is really valuable and will be definitely taken into account during the investigation. I'd also like to drive your attention to such important points. It will be important to emphasize on the certain complications in the documenting of war crimes which can really influence the investigation. Let me delve deeper into this category of cases. This is the fact that as of now, some of the territories are still temporarily occupied. The second point is that some of the victims and witnesses, as of now, are at the temporarily occupied areas or still detained. And another factor, that the witnesses and the victims are not ready to take part in the investigative actions because of the severe psychological state as a consequence of the war crime. So again, I'd like to express my gratitude to Lydia for highlighting those horrible events which took place. In spite of the above-mentioned problematics, the law enforcement authorities go on documenting the war crimes on a daily basis, taking to liability the representatives of the aggressor country for the war crimes. As of today, let me mention in a nutshell that we gave the notices of suspicion to 125 persons by the law enforcement authorities of Kherson region. We sent the indictments to the court, about 180 persons more, and 28 of them got the verdicts. The work is ongoing on the daily basis. It is not stopping. We understand that every crime has specific perpetrators. The ones we identify stage by stage, providing the compliance of the principle of irreversible punishment and the restoration of justice. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Oleksiy. You also mentioned really important messages, important details. We're saying that when we speak about the detention centers, first of all, we say that they're really numerous at the occupied territories. Secondly, it means that a huge number of civilians who disagree with occupation were detained. And also we say that some citizens of Ukraine collaborate with the occupiers and became the part of this repressive mechanism. But also we're saying that there are lots of participants who have already been identified, the notice of suspicion were given, and some of the verdicts are already legal. But the majority of the participants of the cases are not in the penitentiary system of Ukraine because we cannot reach them because of the same reasons. Either they are at the occupied territory or on the territory of Russian Federation, and because of that, it seems to be the logical conclusion that surely, in any way, with all of our forces, me, Olga, our partners in human rights organizations, we are trying to help the national investigation authorities to investigate the detention centers. We are providing all of the documents, whatever we can. But it's obvious that at the national level, they will not be convicted. And because of that, we say that in any case, there is the order of the management of the top level of Russian Federation to create detention centers, to appoint citizens of Ukraine or Russian Federation to create courts at the occupied territories, and also there are some of the verdicts to provide courts, and all of those cases should be combined in one idea. So you will be able to see a crime committed by Russian Federation against the civilians. As I said, the crime of prosecution and persecution. And in this case, we are interested in the opinion of the ICC, because when we speak about the top management, about the orders, then obviously the system, the state system of Ukraine would not likely reach the head of the Federal Service of Russia or the head of the Supreme Court of Russian Federation. And we can also speak about the whole vertical along it. So from our perspective, this research and attracting of the attention to the detention centers at the occupied areas is important in the context of the awareness of this one and unified policy, which has the sign of the crime against humanity. I guess we are almost out of time, so if there are any questions, we would be happy to answer them quickly. Could you raise your hand if there are any questions or remarks? Sorry, one moment, I do not hear you.
About compensation for people like Pani Vika who have been victims of Russian war crimes. What kind of support has there been for families like that who have managed to return to Ukraine-controlled territory? Thank you.
Так, зараз запитання.
So the question was about the compensations which the people could get, people like Lydia, after they have been taken to the occupied territories, but did they get the compensation? So how can you see how can this year, more than a year in the Russian torture chambers, be compensated? Do you feel this support from the state? The state really helped us a lot. The Ministry of Reintegration paid us, each of us, 100,000 hryvnia for the release, and for every year 100,000 more. This money allowed us to get to our senses, because in the beginning I couldn't even wash the dishes because I was in the horrible state, especially mentally. when I was released, I was as if I was freed, but I was looking at myself, and then the psychologist told me it was named dissociation. I saw myself from a side. My body is working, but I'm looking at myself. But then it changed later. For such people like I am, I can see wider access to medical care, because it really deteriorated my health. If not humanitarian organizations, I would lose my eyesight instantly. It was okay there, but in 3 months I almost totally lost my eyesight, thanks to the humanitarian organization Andreev's Foundation and Caritas Ukraine. They looked into each of my surgeries and paid for each of them. And also the women's organization through CRSV helped us. I'm also the member of this organization, trying to help others, because it really takes a long time to get to your senses. And a huge issue is in reintegration into the society. Before that, I had business, I used to have a job, and suddenly I lost everything. My money was taken, and my accommodation is ruined, so I am left not needed by anyone. I am of the pension retired people age, so I understand that I am not needed by anyone. Pardon my French. So this is the issue. Thank you for sharing what the people leave after captivity, which tells us about the comprehensive issue which needs to be solved. We are speaking about 2 levels, the international level, and obviously we are speaking about the register. We can see new categories of crimes opened, which give the people the opportunity to get there, including what was described by Lydia and others who lived through that, because we can see that those are several crimes. They lost their health, they were deprived of freedom, sometimes they were forced to move to another country. So those are separate categories which gradually allow the victims to get to the international register and to hope for all of the compensatory mechanisms. But it's important to substantiate them with the real mechanisms, so this real damage could be paid for by Russian Federation, which is an important process as of today. The national level is about the state support, first of all. Lydia said about 100,000 hryvnia. It is done according to the law which was adopted in 2022. The support for the people who were deprived of freedom and detained because of Russian aggression. 2 categories of financial support: 100,000 hryvnia for every year of illegal imprisonment, and one-time payment of 100,000 after the release. Today it is done through the Ministry of Development of Communities. It used to be the Ministry of Reintegration. So the certain commission takes the decision, interinstitutional one. Tatiana and I are the members of this commission, and we're looking into each case. But let me tell you instantly, even those payments, unfortunately, do not cover all of the people's needs. For instance, we used to help to some of the Crimean people released to have some dental works, which could cost 150,000 hryvnia, and that is only about the dental help, which is not enough, of course. But it's not about the specific sum of money, but the development of the comprehensive support system. That's what we insist on with our colleagues from the human rights organizations, so that Ukraine could develop the comprehensive support system of all of the people affected by different crimes of Russians, the ones who had this loss of health and other types of harm. And now we started the work with the Ministry of Social Policy, because as of today we can see them as the main addressee of this issue, because in our government there is no specific ministry which could be directly responsible for the victims, which makes this work complicated. for the victims themselves, the issue of their support and its development. So besides the compensation, what's also important that the people could develop this comprehensive system of help which is needed by the people. Lydia told about her needs, but they're really individual. That's age, the health state, whether she's with the family or not, whether she has children and not. So the consequences could be totally different, which you can overcome in 2 or 3 months. But there can be diseases or such consequences which claim medical services from the state during the whole life. So it needs to be taken into consideration. But to take that into account, Ukraine has to know how many victims there are, which needs they have, so this system is not developed. And that's what we, with the colleagues from Zmina, who are also working on that, we are insisting on that, and we hope that this support system will be developed. Thank you, Olga, for your clarification. Are there any other questions left? As far as I can see, no questions left. Then thank you so much, and let me thank all of you that you joined us, all of the speakers who supported us. A separate gratitude goes to the prosecutor from Kherson who joined us, and the whole team of the Media Initiative for Human Rights who used to work on this report. We have a huge team working on that. Thank you so much, and we are ready to talk to you and answer all of your questions in other formats. Thank you.